Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program this evening. We've just opened up the webinar, so participants are making their way from the waiting room into the webinar, and we'll be getting started shortly. So thanks for your patience. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy, California Dreamin'. The participants are just entering from the waiting room now, so we're going to pause here for a minute or so as we let people enter and get settled. Thanks for your patience. We'll be getting started shortly. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy, California Dreaming, presented by Rex Parker. We're going to be getting started in just a minute here. I'm going to give a little more time for some folks to enter from the waiting room. So I just want to thank you for your patience, and we'll be back shortly. So it's just a few minutes after 5 o'clock here, so we're going to get started. Again, thanks everyone for attending this evening. Welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy, California Dreamin', presented by Rex Parker. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host this webinar. We have more than 100 people registered for this presentation. So for those of you who are new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do this with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, librarianship, and much, much more. So if you're not a member, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do at the book club, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many. And we simply cannot do the work that we do without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit the website at bccbooks.org to join or donate to the Book Club of California. And now for tonight's speaker and our program. Rex Parker is an American artist, designer, and illustrator. Born and raised in a small farming town in Illinois, as a youth, Parker earned the rank of Eagle Scout and lettered in basketball. But in his free time, he was always drawing. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Graphic Design at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb. And today, his love for classic Americana can be seen mixing with the hip, urbane, and modern style in his art. In 1986, Parker established an award-winning design firm in Hinsdale, Illinois, later moving to Printers Row in Chicago before settling in Park Ridge, Illinois with his young family. Over the next 30 years, Rex helped Fortune 500 companies and other organizations increase brand awareness, expand their market share, and build product loyalty. Some of his major clients have included United Airlines, Whirlpool, Hyatt, T-Mobile, and many others. Looking for art in unexpected places came naturally to Parker, and his new hometown was no exception. He was elected to the city council and chaired the first Park Ridge Art Commission. While busy with his corporate clients, Parker made time to create his uniquely colorful, Art Deco-inspired collectible posters for many local service organizations and institutions. His works have included posters for citywide street fairs, outdoor concerts, local charity drives, and more. Perhaps most notably, he was hired to create the graphically bold Games On poster series for Chicago's Olympic bid. He revisited the era of drive-ins and road trips with his iconic Route 66 Rocks poster series. Tonight, Rex Parker's talk is titled H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy, California Dreamin'. After H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy collaborated on the Door in the Wall project, their creative compass seemed to always point west to the Golden State of California. In part one of his talk this evening, called Time Traveler in Tinseltown, Parker will showcase H.G. Wells and Hollywood's golden age, featuring such sci-fi classics as The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, and The War of the Worlds. In part two of his talk tonight, Frederic Goudy, the Titan of Type, Parker explores the great private presses of the age, the Village Press, the Grabhorn Press, and University of California Press, and their finest printed editions, from Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, The Hollow Land by William Morris, Door in the Wall by H.G. Wells, to Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Parker is expected to include some wonderful yarns of the key figures of the era. Mitchell Kennerley, William Morris, Sir Emery Walker, Henry James, William Randolph Hearst, Winston Churchill, Orson Welles, Charlie Chaplin, and Edwin, Robert, and Jane Grabhorn, just to name a few. So if you have any questions for our speaker tonight, please use the chat and the Q&A function in Zoom. We should have time at the end of the hour to take questions, and we'll curate those questions from both the Q&A and the chat function. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Rex Parker and pass over the controls for tonight's webinar. Rex, it's all yours.
Okay. Hey, thanks. I'd like to thank the Book Club California for hosting this talk. H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy, California Dreamin'. In this presentation, you'll see some original historic photos and original posters I've done for two poster series. One, Frederic Goudy, Titan of Type, and a new series I just completed, H.G. Wells, The Time Traveler's Life, and it's to celebrate the 125th anniversary of The Time Machine. H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy would only work on one project together, but it was a turning point in both their careers. What I find kind of fascinating is H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy have a lot of similarities. Their lifespan was almost identical within a year or so. They both created this mass amount of work. Wells would write over 100 novels. Goudy would produce over 120 typefaces. They both came from very humble beginnings, and because of financial crisis in both their families, they were, their original career paths was, incredibly not what they turned into be. Wells started out working in a drapery company, basically a sweatshop, and then he finally got a degree out of college as a science teacher and working in the kind of countryside and barely getting by, money-wise. Goudy started out as a bookkeeper. But both Frederic Goudy and H.G. Wells would, against all odds, Wells would go to London and Goudy would go to Chicago, and they would, Wells would become a writer and Goudy would become this great type designer. And the other thing is they're both in their era, just celebrities. They're rock stars, basically. Well, how did they get together in this first project? It was basically 6 degrees of George Bernard Shaw, whether it's William Morris or the William Suffrage movies. It seemed like Shaw was always connected, and he knew Wells for a number of years. They were friends for decades, and they kind of were in this friendship rivalry. They kind of wore the words, and basically this whole project started with a letter to Shaw from this young Boston photographer asking if Shaw would pose for a photo, and Shaw said, what the photographer didn't know, Shaw loved photography, and he writes back, I could meet with you anytime next week except Thursday. I have a 8x10 camera, a tripod, and a working darkroom in my bathroom if you want to use it. Well, the photographer writes back, sets a date, and I'm going to use my own equipment. So when he gets off the train on his platform in Shaw's country home, there's George Bernard Shaw, this tall, skinny guy with a red beard, holding a 6-foot wooden pole. He puts a pole in between the camera handle, and the two guys carry the camera equipment up to Shaw's house. Well, the photographer was Alvin Langston Coburn, this sensational soft focus photographer, and this portrait of George Bernard Shaw would start this 17-year odyssey of portraits for Coburn, and they would include writers and artists and world leaders like Theodore Roosevelt, and it would produce true great books of portraits. Men of Mark, published by Mitchell Kennerley in 1913, and then more Men of Mark. And Coburn, Shaw would call Coburn the world's greatest photographer. And he was instrumental in getting a couple of these portraits, including the famous French sculptor Rodin and H.G. Wells. Well, Shaw contacts Coburn and said, hey, we're gonna go see Wells at his country house down in Kent along the coastline. Well, this country house was designed by the famous English art and crafts architect, C.F.A. Wolsey. And Wolsey was famous for doing a heart symbol element at the entrance of all its doors. Well, H.G. Wells was not going to have a heart in his door. So him and the architect went round and round. They finally settled on a Spade and became Spade House. And Spade House was kind of this iconic community place for writers in their Edwardian age. But this weekend was only be Wells, Shaw, and Coburn. Coburn photographs Wells, and then they all three of them take a walk along the beach. And Coburn's walking 5 feet behind him. He's this young 20-year-old kid, and these guys are legends. They get back in the Spade House, and Wells serves tea. Well, Coburn's so nervous, his hands shaking, spills tea all over his lap. He has to go in the other room, hang up the trouser. He puts on some, Wells trousers, and walks out. And Shaw and Wells just crack up laughing, breaks the ice, and Coburn becomes fast friends with H.G. Wells. Well, Coburn's one of the few photographers of the soft focus era that does images for books. He does this 24-volume set of books for Henry James. He does the only color photo ever of Mark Twain. And he's tenacious. And he immediately asks H.G. Wells, hey, let's work on a project. And Wells goes, well, I got a bunch of these short stories. And Coburn goes, great, I can do an image for each one. And Wells commits to do a new story for the book. Well, Coburn came from a fairly affluent Boston family. He had studios in London and New York, and he's always going back and forth. And he gets back to New York, and he runs into Mitchell Kennerley, this famous publisher. He's kind of the first modern publisher. And in his early years, Mitchell Kennerley was kind of this dashing Jay Gatsby character, and him and Coburn about the same age. And when Kennerley finds out Coburn's doing an H.G. Wells book, he immediately says, I'll publish it. And so all of a sudden, this book project comes together. Because Kennerley's best friend is Bertha Goudy. And they actually, at one point, they both had their businesses in the same New York building. And Kennerley thought this would be the perfect chance to develop Goudy's career into the big time book design market. Well, all of a sudden you have this book publishing dream team. You have H.G. Wells, one of England's great writers. You have Frederic Goudy, who had already designed 20 typefaces, including a font for Pabst Brewing Company and the famous Gimbel's department store, Gimbel's and Macy, but he's never had a hit typeface. And then, of course, as Shaw said, the world's greatest photographer. And one of the things that made Kennerley such a great publisher is he had this team working together, sharing notes and stuff. It's one of the first books everybody's kind of collaborated on. And the book is The Door on the Wall, this great a limited edition book. And I've been fortunate enough to go to the Rare Book Library at the University of Illinois. They have the largest H.G. Wells collection in the world. They actually have H.G. Wells' personal copy of The Door on the Wall. It's magnificent. And H.G. Wells, if you like H.G. Wells, the Time Machine, the War of the Worlds, you'll love his short stories. They're fast paced. They have these great plot changes, and they're wicked. And this book kind of covers from his first short story to like 17 years, until 1911, when he does the Door on the Wall. The Door on the Wall, I think, is his best short story, and it's one of his best stories, period. And it's his last science fiction story. He'd go on and write other stories, utopian stories and political and stuff, but this is his last, and it's a great story. And when I first read it, I had to go back and read it again, and I couldn't sleep that night. It's one of these bittersweet stories that just hits you. Well, Coburn would spend almost a year doing the photography for this book. He's riding his bike all over London, taking these shots. And U of I has this great collection of 28 letters that he wrote to Wells as, kind of documenting how he was doing on the project. And my favorite letter was this letter about him saying about how after months, he finally found the door for the Door on the Wall. It's this image right here. It's just a marvelous image. And he would tell Wells, even if he went in the studio, couldn't have done any better. So all of a sudden, Goudy gets these great story, great copy from Wells, this great photography. And Goudy decided he wanted this really tight letter spacing on this book. And he started out with Caslon, and he did a test sheet. He wasn't happy. The Caslon was really loosey-goosey letter spacing. So he goes to have a meeting with Kennerley. And the thing that made Kennerley such a great publisher, he knew printing, he knew typography, he knew paper. And Goudy explains what he wants to do, and Kennerley goes, well, that sounds great. It's tight letters, it would work pretty well. And he shows him the test route, and he said, this is working. And Kennerley goes, what do we do? And Goudy just says, I have to design a type font. And Kennerley says, okay. Well, I gotta be honest, there isn't a publisher in 1911 or 2020 that would have done that. But Kennerley knew Goudy, and he knew what a great type designer was, and he trusted him. And by the way, Goudy was behind schedule at this point. He'd been kind of goofing around with some other stuff. And he goes back to his office, and when you design a typeface, you have to do all the uppercase, all the lowercase, and the initial, and all the numerals, punctuation. I mean, this takes months, years, whatever, to do this thing. In one week, Goudy designed a new typeface. Well, let me pull back. Somewhere in that week, he turns to his wife, Bertha, and says, hey, should I do an accent type font? And she goes, sure, go ahead and do it. Because she's always supporting. It's one of the things that made her great. She's always supporting Goudy. And in 1 week, Goudy designs 2 type fonts. I mean, this is like Olympic athlete doing a decathlon and going right into the marathon and winning both events. I mean, it's impossible. Only Goudy could do this. And this is a letterpress era. And by the way, he didn't have a computer. He didn't have a team of designers. He was doing each letter by himself, one at a time, each letter form. And back then, this was the letterpress era. So you had to get master matrices made and cast the type and stuff. And Goudy had this, his go-to guy in Chicago, Robert Whitman, and he'd been doing all this master type for him. And Goudy packages up all his drawings with, I think, a little note. I mean, I have nothing other than my guess. And the note basically said, I am so far behind, please get this done. I mean, it's in some archive or got burned up in one of the Village Press fires, because I've been in design situation where your color printer, and I am so behind, you got to get it done. And Whitman got the type back in 30 days. And Bruce Rogers, a great book designer of the era, would call Bertha the fastest type, doing the type, and the best. And in less than a couple weeks, they had the book on press on schedule, and all of a sudden the reviews for and H.G. Wells loved the book, and the reviews from his writing was off the chart. People loved the photography of Coburn. I mean, there's these haunting images, and it's been by some reviews some of the most beautiful images to grace the book. And as much as everybody liked the book and everything, they loved Goudy's new typeface. And he named it after Kennerley. We called it Kennerley Old Style. It was Goudy's first hit typewriter, and the reviews were off the chart. In England, somebody called it the greatest typeface in 200 years. That's how great. And all of a sudden, Goudy went from being Goudy book designer to Titan of Type. He became this international celebrity almost overnight. And he was 46. He was not this young kid. And The Door on the Wall would be this landmark piece for both Goudy and Wells. It would be Wells' last piece of science fiction, and it's really good. And it would be Frederic Goudy's first hit typeface. And for the next 30 years, both these guys would be working on different projects, but their compass would always turn west to California. For Wells, it'd be the film industry. For Goudy, it's just great private presses out in California. Well, H.G. Wells, Hollywood has done over 120 projects off his writings. He's their go-to guy in Hollywood, one of the go-to guys. But Wells is part of the Hollywood's golden age. He was like the time traveler in Tinseltown. He was really good friends with Charlie Chaplin and his wife, Pamela Goddard. And whenever Chaplin was in London, him and Wells would get together. And when Wells would come out and work on a Hollywood project, he'd stay at Charlie Chapman's house for a week, 2 or 3 weeks. And then when he's, after that, he'd go stay at Hearst Castle. And William Randolph Hearst loved having him there. It was like a celebrity. I mean, here's Goudy, here's Wells in this, the greatest Hollywood era ever. And he's one of the biggest stars. And because Wells knew Charlie Chapman's best friend was Douglas Fairbanks. Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford were Hollywood royalty. So Wells is going to all these parties and stuff. And it was just awesome. And one of the things I just got to bring up is U of I has these great letters between Charlie Chaplin and H.G. Wells, these cables and telegrams. They're just awesome. Well, Wells's first book to be made in a movie was First Men in a Movie. It's one of my favorite books. It has the British edition has this great arts and craft moon and these great illustrations. And H.G. Wells would actually predict the Apollo moon landing 60 years before it happened. But what he didn't predict, the year after he did the book, H.G. Wells and Jules Verne would be co-authoring the first sci-fi movie, A Trip to the Moon. It was done in France. It was a short 14-minute black and white silent film. And H.G. Wells and Jules Verne didn't get credit, but neither did the director. There was no credits. They didn't know what credits were. This is how I knew it was the film industry. But this film is this iconic film. It's one of the top 100 films of all time. It has this great shot of the rocket going to the moon and the eye of the moon. And the first part of the story is Jules Verne, going from Earth to the moon, and then on the moon is H.G. Wells. The French director thought he was going to make a fortune U.S. What he didn't know is one of Thomas Edison's agents got a copy, took it back, and Edison made a fortune. But still, it's one of these just great films. H.G. Wells' first Hollywood movie was his second book, The Island of Dr. Moreau, which he did in 1896. It's kind of this dark, story with this, crazy doctor using genetics to turn people into animals and back and forth. The first Hollywood production would be titled Island of Lost Souls, and it's Charles Lawton and Bela Lugosi. And actually, in the trailer, they had Bela Dracula Lugosi to goose up the attendance. And this was done before the code system, so it had these kind of over-the-top special effects. Wells wasn't as happy. He thought they kind of missed the storyline. But The Island of Dr. Moreau has been made into 7 different movies starring, one Marlon Brando, one Burt Lancaster. And the thing with this book, Island of Dr. Moreau, I think it's totally opposite of what Wells was. He's more the island of hope. And during the time Wells is in Hollywood, he's also formed this really good friendship with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, during the start of the New Deal. And Wells actually writes this book, The New America, the New World. And the last passage is, the only way out for American mankind is up, which kind of inspired this poster. And one of the things I thought was just kind of amazing is FDR and Wells, when they got hit by adversity of health, they just pushed back. And FDR had these famous birthday balls to raise money for polio. And one of the radio guys pulled him aside, said, why don't you go on the radio and ask for donations? So FDR went and just asked for a dime, and he got overwhelmed by this and started the March of Dimes. And that funding helped find the cure for polio. And FDR, when he passed away, Congress put his image on the dime is for his work for the March of Dimes. Well, H.G. Wells in his later years got diabetes, and his doctor who diagnosed him formed the Diabetes Association of the UK, which still exists now with a slightly different name. And Wells was rich at that time. He could just cut a check and be done with it. But he wrote a letter and published in one of his London newspapers, asking for a contribution. He became the first cause celebrity. And the money they raised was given to people throughout England for insulin for diabetes. Wells' second Hollywood movie was The Invisible Man, just kind of dastardly character. He wrote in 1897, his third novel. And The Invisible Man in Hollywood, Wells had a lot of control. And in his first American film for Claude Rains, who would go on to do Casablanca and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He's just a great character. And this is a great film. And Wells loved it. And The Invisible Man is one of Hollywood's favorite vehicles for H.G. Wells. They made 14 films off of this book. Moss from Mad Men just did a version last year. Vincent Price did a version. Evans Costello did a version of all things. And what's kind of amazing about this, Coburn, great photographer with the Door on the Wall, who right after World War I, he was at the zenith. He was the most popular photographer on the planet. World War I really hit him, and he decided to go into mysticism and the Freemason movement. He shut down his photo studio in London. Him and his wife moved to a small rural seaside village in Wales, and he studied mysticism and his Freemason movement and gave him photography. He became the invisible photographer. I'm just kind of sad of the work he could have done over the next decades, but he was always happy with his decision. One of the other vehicles that Hollywood loved was War of the Worlds. What was funny, when he published this in 1898, Wells was at war with his illustrator. He was sending memos to his publisher. He hated these illustrations. He couldn't believe he'd do Martians with turrets and castles. That was absurd. But a few years later, a Brussels publishing house did a new edition of the War of the Worlds, and he used this Brazilian illustrator. And Wells loved these. These are just spectacular illustrations. And Wells, tragically, this illustrator a couple years later during the pandemic would die, but his illustrations are just, I think immortalized. And then, of course, in 1938, Orson Welles was being produced by John Houseman and with the Mercury Theater Players, would do their Halloween radio 1938 broadcast of War of the Worlds. This became a global sensation. And Orson Welles and Houseman almost got arrested, but instead they got Hollywood contracts. And in 1940, and by the way, H.G. Wells' sales for War of the Worlds just rose amazingly. He loved it. He was making a ton of money off the book now. A couple years later, 1940, the gods put H.G. Wells and Orson Welles in San Antonio, Texas. They were both doing speaking engagement, and a really smart radio guy brought them on the radio. And this is as a classic piece of radio. It's on YouTube. Please listen to it. And H.G. Wells and Orson Welles, they're just huge personalities. And H.G. Wells takes the first shot at Orson Welles and saying, "My young American, he should lose his E on his last name." And they kind of went back and forth. But these guys are pros. And so at the end of the interview, H.G. Wells goes, "Hey, Orson, what about this movie?" And Orson Welles goes, "Oh, thank you. I want to plug this movie." Well, the movie was Citizen Kane. So H.G. Wells helps Orson Welles launch one of the greatest movies of all time. Also, the War of the Worlds helped Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill and H.G. Wells were really good friends, and they wrote letters together and stuff. And Winston Churchill was a closet sci-fi fan, and even though he's a great writer, and he was always borrowing lines from H.G. Wells for speeches, and he'd write a little note. It's kind of like Tony Blair, referring to Doctor Who or Star Trek or something like that. But one of the things that Winston Churchill did do is his World War II novel, The Gathering Storm. That line, The Gathering Storm, came right up the War of the Worlds, and actually the book became a Golden Globe winning TV movie. So Wells maybe helped win World War II too. Anyway, Frederic Goudy, just like Wells went to London and became a writer, Frederic Goudy came to Chicago as a bookkeeper, and around the time of the first Chicago's World Fair, and he met his wife Bertha. And when he wasn't seeing Bertha or working as a bookkeeper, he'd go to the Newberry Library, and it became his college. And he'd pick up books on typography and printing, and he discovered William Morris, and he was energized to open his own private press. And he opened the Camelot Press in Printer Row, and it didn't last too long. And then finally, in 1903, he came to Park Ridge, Illinois. I'm doing this broadcast from Park Ridge, Illinois, 8 blocks away. Frederic Goudy in a little farmhouse with Bertha and a barn started the Village Press, right across the street from Village Hall. And the press was in the barn. And Bertha would, put all the type together, compose all the type in their house. I don't know if it was with a light or candlelight or kerosene lamp or something like that. And the Village Press name came from a poem from Longfellow, the village blacksmith. And Goudy wanted this kind of gathering place, kind of like a Starbucks. And the Village Press kind of, he had kids come over and see him do printing and stuff like that. And he did a number of books in Park Ridge, and one of my favorite was A Hollow Land. And this is an early William Morris fantasy fiction, and it's a great piece of art and craft, and there's wonderful borders and this great illustration, woodcut illustration. And The Hollow Land, this type here is actually hand calligraphy of Goudy. And then he had done this village type font that they use kind of as a house font for the books and stuff. This is just a fabulous piece of printing. And at the end of the first year in business, Park Ridge, Goudy decided to enter 4 or 5 of his books into the printing competition at the St. Louis World's Fair. And come on, he's been in business a little over a year. He's got a press in his barn. He's going to be competing against Italians and Germans and British and all the big, presses in the United States. Well, the Village Press gets a bronze medal. From day one, they're viewed as one of the greatest presses of all time. And he would later on, they would move to a different location to Massachusetts and then New York. But regardless, Goudy was always this Midwestern guy, and it was this Midwestern connection, and also his, striving for quality that connected Goudy to the Edwin and Robert Grabhorn, and Jane and Bertha was always really good friends too. And so this would kind of drew Goudy out to the West Coast. And in 1932, Goudy would cut one of his typefaces, Aries, which he'd done in 1926. It was one of his favorite typefaces, and he was going to keep it as one of his house fonts. But Edwin Grabhorn saw the face, loved it, and suggested, he convinced Goudy to sell it to him, and also said, "Can you name it Franciscan? It would really work well in the West Coast." In 1934, they used it, really well in the Spanish occupation of California. This really great book. The type was awesome. They did these really wonderful maps, and was ranked one of the top 50 books in 1934. That was also the year that Grabhorn Press did its masterpiece. It's 1934 edition of The Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. This is one of the greatest books ever done. It had this mahogany cover. It was like over 400 pages. They had these great illustrations. And they worked on it for almost a year. One of the reasons they worked on it for almost a year is they had, was a typeface. They had 100 pages composed with a different type font. And then all of a sudden, Grabhorn saw a version of Goudy, one of Goudy's typefaces called Goudy New Style. And all of a sudden, they just destroyed all this work, hours and hours of work, and started from scratch with this type font. They thought it made the book. It was, and so this great book was anchored by Goudy New Style, and it was just, just wonderful. I mean, I can't believe, but it's just one of these amazing books. Goudy also did a lot of work with the University of California Press, and in 1938 they hired him to design a new type font, and he started out doing this this font called Pax, and he, got to press, the test sheet, hated it, pitched it, started from scratch, which one became the University of California Old Style. He was one of Goudy's most popular fonts. The funny thing was he wanted to call it University Old Style, but the press says, no, you got to have California in there, which Goudy said was okay. The University of California Press would do a couple, books of Goudy's, great type. They did Typological, this great book of a type, one of the two great, Bibles if you want to know Goudy's philosophy on typesetting and stuff. And chapter 5 is all about how he designed a typeface for the university. It's really, it's more in depth than what I'm doing here. It's really great. And also they did this really small 3x5 book. It was, gold foiled and stamped, and it had this wonderful marbleized cover. And the title was BR to FWG, basically Bruce Rogers to Frederic Goudy. And it had all these cute little stories between Bruce Rogers and Frederic Goudy. And my favorite was When Bruce Rogers was working for the Cambridge Press over in the UK, a friend Bertha went over to England for a visit, and the Goudys and the Rogers went to have dinner with Emery Walker and his daughter Dorothy and Hammersmith for dinner. And Emery Walker is this famous, iconic, type guy. He'd worked with William Morris at the Comstock Press. He'd co-owned the Doves Press, and Rogers and Goudy just adored him. And at the time of the dinner, they're, Walker's a little older in age, and Walker pulls Rogers, asks Rogers to come over, and what he thought was a whisper. And by this time, Walker's hearing was kind of going, and he says, "What are Goudy's initials?" It was like a foghorn. Everybody could hear it. And Roger had to scream at him to get, tell him what to, Goudy's initial. Walker wanted to sign a book and give it to Goudy. And no one said a word at the dinner party. But later on, Rogers and Goudy would chuckle a little bit, but they just adored him. It's just one of these kind of charming little stories. The other great book that the University of California did on Goudy was The Alphabet and Elmer's Letter. This is the 1942 edition. This is just an amazing book. If you like Goudy, you want to know his heart and soul of design, read this book. It's just fabulous. Goudy also did some work with Scripps College. He was going down there for dinner, and the guy he's having dinner with had a conflict. So he asked, the Scripps College guy asked this young librarian, Dorothy Drake, if she'd mind filling in for him for dinner with Goudy. And from all accounts, it was just a great dinner. They had Dorothy Drake and Goudy talked type and books and stuff, and she just had a marvelous time. And so the next day in class, she was telling all her students about how she met Frederic Goudy, and wouldn't it be marvelous for their press to have a typeface designed by Frederic Goudy, but it's a lot of money and $1,500. And now one of the students goes, Miss Drake, and she, asks, the guy to speak, and the guy says, "My grandma's rich, she'll pay for the typeface." And so in between the vision of the librarian, the grandma's donations, some other stuff, they got Frederic Goudy to design this great typeface, Scripps College old style, for the college. And here's actually Goudy designed the typeface at the time, and this is Goudy and Dorothy Drake. It commences her, and just, I think it's the college president. But Dorothy Drake just looks so happy. And by the way, librarians and rare book collectors, they rule. They rule the world. They're like Indiana Jones people. They're great. And Goudy's work, his typefaces are still producing great books today. The Aryan Prince in 1979 does this amazing edition of Moby Dick. The Growler Club's call this one of the top 100 books of last century. And it's got these, the printing is awesome. The illustration is off the chart. And the linchpin for this book is Goudy Modern, which Goudy did in 1918. And he's got these great illustrations. The apocryphy is off the chart. And one of the reviews, I'm saying basically overviewing what this review said, but basically the reviewer said, this classic American book, using typeface from American's classic type design, Frederic Goudy. What a combination. In 1940, basically, when the United Nations got started, it got a little assist from H.G. Wells, Eleanor Roosevelt, and the University of California Press. The first meetings of the UN happened in San Francisco in 1945, and the University of California Press got the job of typesetting and putting the Charter of the United Nations together. And what a project. The committees had months to get together. The press had 4 days. And they actually did a book printing the United Nations Charter. And if you're a type geek, get this book. And this is pre-computers. They have all these markups and fold-outs of all the changes. I don't know how these guys put this thing together. And they did multiple languages. And the people are bringing clothes for the type setters to take a shower to keep going. They're working, all night, and the poor bindery guys their hands up the arthritic, sewing this stuff together. But they got it done. It got signed. They're, birthed the United Nations. But did they get a phone call saying, "Hey, great job"? No, they got a phone call. "Hey, we need 100 issues. When can you have it done?" And they got it done in the next couple of days. H.G. Wells' last 4 or 5 years of his life, he spent in committee meetings and in conferences trying to develop a universal right of man. And at some point, he just got frustrated with minutia, and he just wrote this book, "What Are We Fighting For? The Rights of Man." And Penguin Publishing did it. It was only published in the UK. It was a small little book, but it might be one of the most important books H.G. Wells did. And one of my curator friends at University told me that Wells is known for asking for additional, books to hand out to friends. And I will guarantee you, one of the signed copies got in the hands of Eleanor Roosevelt. Tragically, Wells never saw this come true. He died before the rights, ever got done. But after World War II, when the United Nations were being formed, the UN headquarters in New York hadn't been done, and they're having the meetings in Paris. And President Harry Truman named Eleanor Roosevelt to the committee, U.S. delegation, and she got put in charge of developing the universal rights, human rights. And she took Wells' book, and it's kind of the touchstone, the blueprint for this document. They kept going back and forth for Wells, and basically his soul is in this document. And but I worked on a city council in Park Ridge, and getting things written is one thing, getting it passed is the other. And Eleanor Roosevelt used all her charm, her political skills, and tenacity to push the thing forward. And in December, I think December 10th, 1948, it was a vote 4 o'clock in the morning. This document passed unanimously. There was only 8 countries that abstained. And the next morning, the UN asked Eleanor Roosevelt to go to the podium. And for the first, only, and last time, one person got a standing ovation. And basically, H.G. Wells and Eleanor Roosevelt combined to create one of the milestone documents of human rights. And it ranks up there with the Magna Carta and the U.S. Constitution as one of these great documents. And in 2014, the Aryan Press did their 100th book. They did their own version of lithograph. And the paper they used, they bought in 1985. They had it sitting there for the special book. And this book is just marvelous. And the cover and the spine, I even love the spine. And basically, they used some elements from the original edition of Leaves of Grass. And this masterpiece of bookmaking was anchored by the Goudy Classic, the University of California Old Style by Frederic Goudy. Just great book. And so even today, whether you're seeing reading a book for H.G. Wells, a time traveler, time machine, or seeing one of his movies, or you're seeing one of these great books using classic Goudy face, H.G. Wells and Frederic Goudy are still California Dreamin' right now. And I want to thank the Book Club of California for letting me give the speech. It was a lot of fun stories. There's a few people I got to thank. I got to thank the Aryan Press, the Grabhorn Institute, the University of California Press, the Denison Library and Scripps College. They helped me get some of these photos from Goudy and Dorothy Ray. They're just awesome. The H.G. Wells Society in London, the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, and the Universal Order of UK, who own the Coburn rights, and photographer.com, which has some of the Coburn stuff, and a rare book and manuscript library, University of Illinois. And you can follow me on Instagram at Rex Parker Design. And thanks. I hope everybody had fun. I hope there's just some fun stories.
I'm back. That was great, Rex. You raced through it though. It was so fast. I know you were a little worried about time there. So
I'm sorry. I get kind of. This is fun talking about. I hope I didn't go too fast.
No, that was good. You can even use some of this time to tell some more stories, because I know you have others. But I'll also remind people that they can put some questions in the chat or the Q&A. Now is a great time to do that, since we've got to the end of the presentation. I just want to say that it was really fascinating. And I know we've talked a lot over the last couple of days to hear about H.G. Wells's deep and diverse connections with all the worlds that he operated in, like the arts and movies and film and celebrities and politics. And I mean, I had no idea. Had no idea. So I think one of the first questions is how did you get interested in kind of a deep dive into H.G. Wells and the sci-fi world and all of his universe?
There's this wonderful curator at U of I, and I basically what had happened is we had an anniversary of the Village Press in Park Ridge, and we have this Kayla Foundation, and we have a number of really great artists here, and they had a couple anniversaries, and they're overwhelmed. And I decided I was going to do a series of posters to kind of promote Goudy. And it turned into 30. At some point, I just started. I want to do one for each type font you can get now, and it was just. And the thing is, Goudy grew up in Bloomington, Illinois, and I grew up 30 minutes from there. And he went to high school 15 minutes from where I went to. So I had a lot of connections to him. And we had an exhibit in his hometown. And I gave a talk, and one of the U of I curators came in and said, "Hey, we don't want to do a talk at U of I to our book department." I said, "Sure." And I found out they had this, great H.G. Wells connection. And I said, "Hey, let's do one with Wells and Goudy." And I just started, the more you get into Wells, the more he's just fascinating beyond belief. And the wonderful H.G. Wells people in London have just been wonderful for me and stuff like that. So it's just kind of snowball, and the 125th anniversary of the Time Machine just got me into. I wanted to do a series, and basically the series of poster I've done is basically museum quality limited edition sets of prints. I mean, there's spectacular, and I've just showed a few of them here, but there's like I think 22 or something like that.
Well, you know what, that's one of my questions a little later, but since you're talking about, the series, tell us a little bit about your creative process and how you go about designing and printing either a single standalone poster or a series of posters. Like,
it's really weird. I mean, I'm one of these old school guys. I started out when you cut and paste stuff, and I went through the transition of computers and things. And in the old days, everything had to be, you had to go to, silk screen or your traditional printing, 4-color or 6-color printing. And now everything's digital. So you can, do, you can get to your, lead print, done in a day. So everything's now basically lead print. Everybody's, it's just in time printing. So I can do 4-color printing and anything I want. I mean, the sad thing is I've got to the point where I'm doing a poster a week. But the H.G. Wells actually, for last 3, I got done 3 posters in 1 week because I'd been working on it all, most of the year and I just want to get it done. But it's just fun. I mean, I seem to incorporate a lot of history into a lot of my posters and stuff, which is kind of fun. And to me, it's like one of the posters of the H.G. Wells series is I found out to get through his early years as a writer, he was doing theater critic reviews. And he actually, and because he knew William Morris, and Morris knew Oscar Wilde, and they're all like, they all were in the same progressive movement. H.G. Wells did a review of the importance of being earnest, the original production. And so I actually did a poster on that. I mean, I said, you have to do a poster of H.G. Wells and of Oscar Wilde, who couldn't do that poster. So it just turned a lot of things, and the people at U of I, they start showing me letters of Einstein and H.G. Wells and Winston Churchill and stuff, and you're like, oh God, I gotta do a poster on this, so that was kind of part of it. I mean, when you actually hold a letterhead from Charlie Chapman's movie company, it's something, or a letter of H.G. Wells in German. And H.G. Wells' secretary is handwriting it out in English. It's one of those like, I can't believe I'm holding this letter. So I don't know. It was kind of fun. So
so there's a question in the Q&A about asking what designers have inspired your work.
Oh Lord.
There's going to be questions about you. We're also have questions about Goudy and about Wells, but there's going to be questions about you.
I love the London crane posters, and the kind of the Depression posters during, those things, but Shepard Fairley, I love. I mean, the guy rocks. I mean, I couldn't climb on buildings and do spray paint stuff like he does. I'm afraid of heights, but his work is just sensational. I don't design like he does, but he's just a spectacular designer. So I just kind of had fun. I mean, I'm at the point right now I get to do really great posters and have fun doing it. So
it was really great to see, because of the visuals, and hear about Frederic Goudy's like transition from, I think you said, book designer to type designer, and see some of the really incredible type families, I guess. Kennerley, Aries, I wrote a couple down, Franciscan. Is there any kind of stylistic elements that run through like all of Goudy's typefaces, or
Well, I
how do
mean,
people recognize a Goudy typeface?
Goudy always did serif typeface. I think he did one cent serif, and he thought it was awful. I think it's awful. It's one of those, but I mean, Goudy old style might be one of the best typefaces of all time. I mean, it's just phenomenal. But I mean, what amazes me is every type font he did by hand. And actually, when you look at Goudy old style, and I always told people in different talks that it looks like, and because Goudy's from Bloomington, he's from Midwest, and you can see him drawing this every letter form, and it looks like some guy from Central Illinois drawing it. It has this kind of warmth and sophistication all at once.
Right.
But no, I just think I just was just amazed by. I mean, I have no idea how to design one type font. I've done enough of logos, but to do 120, the guy's a genius. I mean,
Yeah, is that the number, the count, 120?
it was over 120.
Over 100.
But they had 2 fires. The Village Press got burnt down twice, and so he lost some of them. But there's this Steve Masterson. I have a friend of mine who might be on this talk who was the guy at Microsoft when they started all the type and stuff. And one of the guys he worked with was Steve Masterson, and he's this great type designer. And he goes back in his off time and recreates old Goudy typefaces and digitize them so we can see them now. But I'm just a poster designer. Those guys are really great type designers.
Just a poster designer. Come on.
Well, I mean, Goudy stuff is just. I mean, he's like the Da Vinci of type design. That's my opinion.
So there's a couple of questions about, I guess, type design and how it translates to digital form. Someone says, I love Goudy old style. However, I noticed it doesn't hold up well in a digital form.
I think it does. I mean, it depends, whether it's on, your iPhone or on a printed piece. I mean, and it's the thing with type houses is they're always copying everybody else's typefaces.
Right.
So sometimes you get a good version, sometimes you get a bad version. One of the funny posters I did for Goudy is he had, before he started his own press, he had did a book, hand illustrated a book for the guy who did Wizard of Oz, and they did I forget the book he did. I can't remember right now, but and Mother Goose, I think Mother Goose. And so this illustrator did the illustration and Goudy did all the hand calligraphy. And the thing is, this type house in St. Louis stole his typeface. And not only did it steal the typeface, they call it Hearst, Hearst, named it after Hearst. And Goudy was not only was upset they stole his type on, they named it Hearst, which he didn't like the Hearst papers for whatever reason. So he was more, so anyway, I don't know. So you might have got a bad version, but Goudy, I think, is just one of these exquisite type fonts. I don't know how well it looks on your iPhone, but if you're printed, it's just really neat.
Right. Let's see what we got here. Was Goudy's California work while his press was in Marlboro, New York?
Some wasn't, some wasn't. In 32 or 32, 38, his press in New York burned down, and his wife had just passed away the year before. So he was from then on doing a lot of work with one of these type houses, and Syracuse University gave him access to a lot of typesetting equipment. But I think around that time he started coming out to California more. Yeah, I think part of it was just the fact that his wife had died, and and he loved giving speeches. So he'd drive across the country and give speeches, and he loves seeing the private presses out in California, and that's why I think he spent a lot of time out here. He loved the Grabhorns, and the University of California Press were, these are just great places. He loved interacting with these, and he was a great public speaker. He'd speak anywhere. If there was a Kiwanis Club, he'd go give a speech, and or on the radio or whatever. He was always trying to talk people into doing better quality printing and design and typography. It's kind of his mission in life.
So you told a bunch of great stories, and someone asks, Is there a favorite story of yours about the creative connections between Wells and Morris?
Wells and Morris. Yeah, I mean, to me, the best thing about Wells and Morris, well, not, it's kind of bittersweet. Wells and Morris both during the 1890s did. Wells started doing the first sci-fi books, and Morris was doing the first fantasy fiction books, and they're kind of each trying to top each other. And Morris would die, and H.G. Wells is still doing some critic reviews, and he reviewed the last book, or I think the last or next last book that William Morris produced at Comstock Press. And it wasn't so much a review as a thank you to William Morris for being this great writer. And I just thought that review was touching beyond belief. And so that's my, I know it's kind of sad, but it was, they both had a lot of respect for each other.
There's a couple of very interesting questions here in the Q&A, because I think you said that Goudy Old Style was a great typeface. What makes it a great typeface?
Because CA Magazine said so. No, I gotta tell you, CA Magazine back in, I think, God, it's 85, did this article. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say this, I just didn't time in this talk. Did this article and basically said, if you're on a deserted island, what type fonts would you want? And they asked all these book designers and advertising guys, and Goudy Old Style just popped up everywhere. And this one, and the guy Holman, who had owned Arian Press, named a number of Goudy fonts. He just, you could just go with Goudy. Anyway, there was one New York book designer who basically said, I don't need 5 fonts. I just need Goudy Old Style. That's all. I can use that for everything I could ever do, period. And no, but it just, to me, it's just a great type font because it works in headlines, it works in body copy, and it's just gorgeous type fonts. It's just beautiful. So
there's go ahead.
That's just, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is subjective, right? Yeah. So there is this fun question in here about the slide we're looking at, where it says a special thanks to at the top, and the person noticed that the serif at the top of the H, the K, the L, B, and the I on the face all point to the left. Does that slow down reading, do you think?
No, I look. The thing is, when you do about 30 posters of Goudy and you do about 45 faces, I'm just amazed how he's able to do so many different ones. And the characters I thought was always great was he did the best ampersands of all time. Every one is different. No, I think his faces, except for his one serif typeface, which was awful, and the ether was awful. Goudy's faces just really well, on the most part. I think they're exceptional. So I don't know. That's, and Goudy actually said one time he thinks perfect letter form is invisible. You shouldn't be able to see it. You should just read, not even worry about the letter form. And he said what made a really good typeface is not that you had a great C or a great B. It's that they all would kind of flow together, and that's what made a really great type font. Right.
It works as a whole.
Yeah. And and he did it, so I trust him.
So, I'm gonna. It's the top of the hour. It's just 6 o'clock. So if you have a question there, audience, now would be the time to get it in the Q&A or the chat. I'm going to scan through some of these other comments here, and someone said, "I feel like a great wave broke over me, but I love the stories, the conjunctions, and the posters. Thank you for the fascinating presentation. Love the enthusiasm." It's great presentation. Thanks so much. Terrific, so informative, fascinating. Just reading a couple of different, those are in a chat directly to me. Do you have any comments about the N dash or the M dash?
No, I don't.
Set off, the delimited or not delimited by spaces to set off a dashed expression. Do you have a preference? Do you like them? Do you use them?
There was life before computers and life after
Mm,
texting. So punctuation has just gotten really weird lately.
yeah.
Because my daughter says I punctuate. I mean, whenever I do something on Instagram, I don't know how to do it well because you're not supposed to be formal anymore. So I don't know. It's just a different world today. I mean, you just kind of do whatever you want, kind of.
Yeah, some of it's
Unfortunately,
personal preference, right? Personal
yeah,
preference
yeah.
and style.
And actually, my Instagram is ran by my daughter. My one Instagram account, my major one, and she's like, Dad, you don't know what you're doing. You're not hip. So I just send her the images, and she does these great stories and stuff for me. So anyway.
So there's a question here that says, do you know if Goudy ever visited the Book Club of California?
You know,
Yes.
Probably. I bet he did. I mean, he was always out in California. And he was speaking everywhere. He spoke to the Newberry Library and at the Caxton Club, and
Mhm.
he spoke at the Growlers Club. So I assume he probably did. It'd be your records, but I assume he probably did.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
he
can
was
look into
he was
that.
happy to speak basically anywhere. He was kind of like Will Rogers. He had this kind of Will Roger Midwestern kind of speaking style. He was a hit. Actually, it was kind of funny. The people on the East Coast and the East Coast type establishment kind of didn't like Goudy because he was very democratic, and they thought, well, unless you're a special person, you shouldn't be a type designer. And they thought because he started as a bookkeeper, he really wasn't that good. But Bruce Rogers always thought he was great and stood up for him. But Goudy was this larger life person because he's just kind of like this Will Rogers personality. I mean, everybody loved him. I mean, and he was beloved everywhere, including the UK. His type fonts still there all the time. I mean, they just loved him.
Mhm. And a good friend of mine here in the Q&A mentions or reminds me to bring up that when the book club expanded our headquarters space in 2010, that the kind of the brochure and the identity program that we used, the communications were all designed using Goudy's Kennerley.
Oh,
So
great type font. It's a really good type font. I mean,
yeah,
I think it works really well. So
yeah, one of my favorite, and it looks terrific in everything it's used in. Well, one last question before I ask you about what's next for you. I want you to be able to tell us about our next project. But someone asks if you have any thoughts on Wells's last book, The Very Depressed Mind at the End of Its Tether? Question mark.
well, no. Here's the thing. I feel like I've lived with Wells for last year. I
Mhm.
love Wells, but there's a couple times that he would, like he had this great relationship with Henry James, and all of a sudden they had this out and out fight. And he had this great relationship with Sean, and he had this out and out fight. So there's sometimes I just kind of wish he would, but he was temperamental from sometimes. So that's and I think at the end of his life he was frustrated because he wanted to change the world. He wanted peace, and World War II was really hard on him. But I thought was honorable though. He could have went anywhere and got away from the Blitz, but he stayed in London and he was out there with the fire hose and trying, doing his bit during World War II. And I gave him a lot of credit for
Mhm.
that, because he was
Yeah.
pretty rich at the end of his life. He could have done anything he wanted to. Yeah, he had, but he also got the time machine and everything else. So I think he did some great stuff. So there's some clunker books in between, but he did a lot of great stuff.
Great. So that's a perfect segue to, speaking of great stuff, tell us about what's next for you. What is the next project, or what do you want to share with us that people should
Okay,
know about?
it's almost finalized, but I did lecture this summer to a joint lecture. It was supposed to be in person in London, but it ended up being a Zoom talk to the H.G. Wells Society and the William Morris Society. And the office manager at the William Morris Society mentioned to me that they're going to be doing a celebration of the William Morris Comstock Chaucer. It's their anniversary, and she asked if I do a couple of posters. So I'm going to start hopefully working on that next week. And my thought is to do a poster of the people who put the book together. I can't replicate this book. The the Chaucer book is one of the greatest books ever designed, and Moore's is off the chart. But I'd like to like showcase the bookbinder and the different people who worked on that project, and I would make a nice group of 4 or 5 posters. And so that's kind of one of my things I'm doing. I'm also kind of just taking a break for a week after getting done with the H.G. Wells thing. It's been a long year of doing posters on that project. So
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I'm looking to do. I mean, hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. We're a little after 6 o'clock here. So now's the time that I get to thank you, Rex, for a great presentation. Thank you so much to our speaker. And I want to thank everyone for attending this Book Club of California program this evening. There will be an email that will go out to everyone who attended tomorrow around the same time with some of the details from this presentation, like Rex's Instagram, information on his website, if you want to see some of the artwork and illustrations and posters. And if you're interested in purchasing any of them, that'll be in that email to direct you to that right place. So keep a lookout for that. Also, please join us for our next online program, which is titled Aloha Amigos, Richard H. Dillon, author, librarian, historian. That'll be on Monday, November 23rd from 5 to 6 p.m. here on Zoom. That's going to be another live online presentation. It's going to be delivered by Brian Dervin Dillon, who's a PhD, editor, and an author. You could register for this event online at bccbooks.org/programs or using the link in the weekly programs emails that you may be receiving from the book club. Or you can email me and I can get you all the details you need. I'm at kevin@bccbooks.org. So again, thanks, Rex. This was great. Thanks everyone else for joining us this evening. I hope you have a wonderful night. Be well and take care.